Thank you, Charles. How's everybody today? Fantastic. So we've been introduced. Our bios are in there. You can take a look at us. As Charles set up, we want to talk about how we are really operationalizing the aspects of SIF prevention. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things we're doing and how we're leveraging software in my organization and how that extends to the process of how we conduct event reviews, because that's new. It's new to us. It's something we just introduced. So I want to give you some background on that as we move forward. We are all on a journey. In 1992, our total recordable incident rate in the United States was 9. Today, it's 2.7 on average. And what that should really reinforce with you is that when we know the things we need to work on, we can have success. And so I've been doing this journey for really the last 15 years. Carrie and I worked together the last 15 years. We did work together in software, and we were doing some of these things on proactive learning, and now we're advancing it to the aspect of event reviews. And so I will introduce that process. When we think about that, there's really 4 things that I focus on. Is how do I reduce uncertainty for my organization? How do I protect the livelihood of the people and the coworkers that work for us? How do we eliminate waste? Because when events happen, they're expensive. And how do we reduce uncertainty? So that's my focus, and that's the lens I look through each and every time. I'm trying to think about how we improve the quality of life for our coworkers, and how does that extend across the organizations that I work with outside of my organization. And so I've created this list of things that are challenging. So paradoxical 10 to me is things that we think should be doing what they're doing, but in reality, they're not. And so I'm going to talk about 5 on Friday, below the line. Carrie and I are hosting a workshop. We'll get into those bottom 5 on Friday. But the first one is the inputs. Talk about the inputs. We'll talk about WTF. What's the first thing that came to your mind when WTF shows up there? Where to fish? How many played blackjack last night? Nobody? All right, we got a couple. So, personal experience, playing blackjack. If you know how to play blackjack, if the dealer has a 6 and you have a pair of 8s, what do? You split, right? Split, get another 8, split, get another 8, split. So now I have 4 double down hands, right? I'm sitting in a cat's bird seat. I'm going to win some money. Get my hits. The best I come up with is 19. Dealer 6 draws to a 21. That's WTF right there, right? That's not supposed to happen. That's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some other aspect of that. We're going to talk about the focus around prevention versus resilience, that imbalance that exists today. And when we get into the aspect of how we're leveraging software today, what I struggle with, what my organization struggles with, and every organization I talk to, is it's easy to create the definition. It's really hard to apply that. So I got about 30 people in my organization that are really working on this process. And 3 months later, we still haven't really gotten to the clarity, as an example, around, is it a SIF or does it have SIF potential? And so how do we clean that up? And you probably think about capacity from the standpoint of resiliency, recoverability. One aspect about capacity is efficiency and productivity. How do I take that precious limited resource I have and focus them on the right things? So when we get into the process of how we're thinking about and how we're utilizing software, we're really trying to address the definition process, because if my leaders don't understand and it's not real easy and we take a long time to get them answers, we lose credibility. And when we lose credibility, it challenges everything else that we're doing. So how do we move that process forward? The definition is one piece. How you come to a conclusion related to SIF or SIF potential is another aspect. How do you make that as efficient as possible? Removing as much subjectivity as possible. And then creating efficiency and productivity so we can focus on the things that matter. You know this, but our inputs are wrong. Our inputs are wrong to get us to where we want to be. So most of us, if not all of us, are dealing with a plateau of our incidents, but our SIFs are going up. And so the SIFs, the inputs that got us to where we are today have worked, but the inputs need to change if we're going to get better. And that's what I want to talk about. So one way we're using software, and this is an app that's on our phones, all employees have access to this. It's really designed to report an issue from an asset safety perspective, a public safety perspective, we're a utility, or a people safety issue. We have a good catch, we can report that. If we have a compliance or ethics issue, we can report that. But when we talk about learning, we use it for different things. So everybody's familiar with blue line, black line, right? Blue line is what's going on. This is a way to capture that versus what we think it is in real time. The other things you probably never thought about with an application like this is how do you measure psychological safety? This tool helps us learn, understand psychological safety. And this reality is how many or what percentage of people are reporting not anonymously. That's a measure of psychological safety. How do we measure culture change? If I have 100 inputs last month and I have 10 people submitting 10, is that good? What if I had 100 people submitting 1? And so when we measure culture, it's an indicator you may not think about is how do we get more people participating in the process? Now, there may be some of these where we engage learning teams. There may be some of these where we implement corrective actions. But the idea is there's closure around this. Within 24 hours, there's an assignment made. And when it's fixed, we submit a survey to the people that submitted that for feedback. Did this solve their problem? So how you close that process reinforces psychological safety. So here's what I want to talk about where the focus is. And this is where in 15 years, I still feel we have a long ways to go. We put pre-job briefs. We've spent a lot of money developing SIF checklists, and we think that's the end game. It's not. That's the starting point. This is a tool. You may have seen some of these SIF checklists, and some of you may have them where they have an energy wheel on them. What I want to tell you is that this is a brittle system. It's reliant on the employees, the coworkers that work for you, on their knowledge and skill set to complete this. It does not couple hazard with control. That's dependent on the skill and the craft to do that. In addition, it's usually done at a hazard level, but not at a task level. And what this is doing safety harder, which we espouse a lot about. Like, we don't want to do safety harder, we want to do safety better. But in reality, we're trying to do safety harder. We're taking the things we've done before that have been successful, that our organizations have familiarity around, and we apply them to this process. So Carrie and I get an opportunity to do a lot of workshops, and we presented this once, and a guy was all excited, and he came up and said, "Hey, we've solved for this." I'm like, "Tell me more. What have you guys done?" He said, "We've taken the energy wheel and we've identified all the controls that must be present before we begin to work." I'm like, "Okay." I said, "So give me an example." He said, "I have the book." He pulled his book out, nice spiral bound book, very similar to what's on your table, cardstock paper, and he started going through all the different energies and all the different controls. And I said, "Wow, that's a lot. That's really good." I said, "So what happens when the controls aren't in place?" Because some of the controls you identified for rubber gloving, as an example, working on energized equipment, how much control is that in the employee's wherewithal to get in place? Crickets. And so when you think about that process, yeah, we've created some work and we've done some activity, but does that change the dynamic? The other question I asked him, which is really telling to me, and I had to withhold judgment, is how did you create these? We brought our leaders in, we locked them in a room, very similar to this, and we gave them the energy wheel and said, "Identify the controls. We're not leaving until we identify the controls." And that's what they did. And what has that really changed? Hope is not a strategy, right? We hope that they identify the right control. We hope that they have the wherewithal to put that control in place, but that doesn't change anything. So that process, this process here, is where all of our focus and attention is, and it's not going to bear the fruit you think it's going to bear. I went into an organization that spent over $10 million over the course of a few years building SIF checklists. The number of events never changed. When they went out and did the checklist, guess what they found? Over 60% of their observations. Now, this is a SIF checklist. 60% of their observations were focused on PPE. Last time I checked, not a lot of correlation unless you're doing certain activities where PPE is really important. This has to change if we're going to get better. Bottom line. So here's what we're doing. And so again, this is a slightly different application. We've partnered with a third party. It's another app. This is open to the safety team, the safety partners, and leadership. In the course of a year, we complete about 23,000 observations. That's a lot of data. We have people really good at Excel spreadsheets. That's a lot of data to crunch. Software helps us solve that problem. So it helps us in the blue line, black line, obviously. But what it also helps us do in this process is identify the safeguards and controls to support resiliency, recoverability. So we talk about that prevention versus resilience. We've historically, when we were at 9, now we're 2, focused heavily on prevention. We do good work when we know what to focus on. We've demonstrated that. How do we bring up that aspect of resiliency, recoverability? We have the roadmap. It's just now the data to help us get where we need to be. The last thing we did, which is the second part of this critical change that needs to happen, is we put a lot of emphasis in stop work. How many people have been in a meeting and say, who stopped work lately? How many responses do you normally get? Very few. What we're doing that's different is we're building and coupling start when safe with stop work. And what this requires is leadership to change. They don't like to change. They're all about stop work. That's easy. And we know the challenges with stop work. It's all about starting when it's safe. Are the controls or safeguards in place? That's number 2 that needs to change. The third one I'll talk about in a second. Here's the questions we started asking. We've evolved. We've gotten smarter. You know these questions. You've seen them. You've utilized them. Not rocket science, but it's the data, the analysis that we get to. And then we went to this process. And so words are important. We talk a lot about critical controls. Do you talk about essential controls? Because essential controls, an example of oxygen is essential for me to live. Critical seems a little optional. And so when we think about the process and what we do is we'll spend 6 months looking at all the tasks in this example of live gas. When we encounter live gas, which our employees told us was a risk that they don't have good controls over, we spent 6 months trying, testing to come up with the controls. And this is the front and back of a card. It's a magnet, it's a sticker. I wear it on my badge. The backside is our resiliency components, our recoverability. Because if I'm exposed to live gas in a fire, PPE becomes really, really important. It's going to move that death to maybe a burn, which leadership doesn't want to hear or understand, but in reality, that's much better than the alternative. So this is where that comes into play. We have, the last thing I'll say, this is the third piece of this in terms of this dynamic that needs to change, is essential controls are not for everything. Let me repeat. If they're essential, they're not essential if they're for everything. We have 5 tasks in our organization that have multiple tasks below them where we built essential controls. And the idea here is through software, verification, validation, that they're being followed. Very simple, but it takes a lot of work to stand up. And then you reinforce it with the start when safe. So we know we need to build controls and safeguards. What you need to start thinking about is what's the criteria for starting when safe? And that's non-negotiable. No essential controls, no work. And that's how you create leadership attention. It's like, oh, they didn't start the work. Maybe there's something we should look at. Create the resiliency and recoverability, failing safely, which we've demonstrated when we were focused on prevention, we can get there. And then we still have the fallback plan for stop when unsure. So these are the proactive things and how we're leveraging software and how that software is giving us better insights that allows us to learn. Because when we're not learning, our accident rates have plateaued. And so if we're not willing to change inputs, if we're not willing to think differently about what we're doing instead of trying to do safety harder, we're not going to achieve the results we want to achieve. And in fact, we're doing a disservice for our organization. We're doing a disservice for our profession. And all the vendors that come in and want to sell us something that are trying to do that the old way and just change labels, that's criminal. And so that's our opportunity. Carrie, you want to talk about what we're doing in software?
Sure, absolutely. Got a green button, right?
Green button.
So let's talk about this real quick, which is, first of all, before we even go down kind of how we're doing different event reviews differently, in order to achieve success, in my opinion, you need that three-legged stool. And it says we need the people on board, right? They know what they're doing. They know what they need to do. They know how to do it. Then there's the process, which says, how am I going to do it? And the more we can get consistent with that and then train on that, the easier it's going to be for the people in the field to do it right each and every time. And then there's the tool, right, or technology that introduces the capacity that says if we do it all the same way or similarly, we can do analysis on the information better. We're going to increase our capacity because we're going to be able to get the answers quicker. We're going to be able to focus on the things that matter. We're going to be able to answer those business questions that your leaders will bring to you that say things like, well, how many SIFs did we have or P-SIFs did we have that only had mitigating controls where human error could have influenced the outcome, as opposed to a direct control, right, or an absolute control that says, hey, if we had these things in place, right, then it would have eliminated, right, or at least removed that human error aspect. And if you can't answer that quickly and easily, then it becomes more difficult, as Todd said, right? We start to lose credibility. Then we have to go back to the spreadsheets. We have to tweak the way we do things. So some of the things as we talk through, just like we talked through the pre-job brief, is how are we currently doing incident reviews or event reviews? And how should we be doing them to get better and information coming back to get better analysis? So we broke it down into three components that we typically see on an event review that we were struggling to get good information back in order to make better business decisions. So the first one is in incident classification. Todd talked about this. Was it a SIF? Was it a P-SIF? And again, this could be an actual, injury. It could be an event. It could be a near miss. It could be whatever you want to classify it as. But if we struggle, right, if we don't have the way in which we define it, and we don't make it easy for the person doing the classification, then we start spinning our wheels. We start having these discussions, and we eat into our capacity because we're having to do that define or that definition and the classification each and every time is a one-off. And you start to lose time and effort. Okay. The other thing too, as we talk capacity, is I see a lot of EHS professionals or HP professionals, right, who spend a great deal of time doing data entry and doing Excel spreadsheets report running, which to me, that eats into your capacity to be an expert, as an advisor to leadership. Would you rather have the information and be able to make sense of it and drive continuous improvement? Or do you want to be a data clerk? So we want to introduce this capacity so that we can get better information from the field and from the people doing the activity. So the incident classification is SIF, PSIF, or neither, right? So we're going to talk through how we improve the capacity and reduce subjectivity. We're going to leverage the energy wheel to do that. And then number two is we know human error is present, right? We know it's going to be, if not the sole proximate cause, right, or root cause, it's going to be one of the major causal factors. But that's not enough, right? Because when we have just that information and management goes, oh, so, employee, right, didn't do the right thing, let's fire him. Because that's the only information we have was it was a human error, right? It was a behavioral thing, right? And I want action. I want a corrective action. And it's easy to blame, shame, retrain, fire, right, this person. So we want to get into context drives behavior. Are we capturing that context in our event reviews? Why did that employee feel like that was a good decision to do it that way? Are we capturing that information? Now I have that rich context, right? Not necessarily in text, right, where I fill out all this text. I'm going to start capturing what were the influences, what were the contexts that drove these behaviors. And we're going to put that as part of the event review. And lastly, we're going to couple and start looking at the controls. Because a lot of time we do the event review, we do the incident investigation, and we go right from, hey, here's what happened. We do the linear review, right? We boom, we line it all up and it looks really great from a, hindsight bias look. And then we jump right to corrective actions. Review the procedures, train the employee, right? Those kinds of things. And what we're not doing, as Todd said, right, with the pre-job brief, is associating the injury to what controls were in place. Why is that important? Because if I have a SIF or PSIF, and I only have some mitigating controls like administrative controls or PPE, and that's the extent of my controls, I'm basically looking at, in hindsight, and saying, hey, we have to do this 100% correctly. You employee have to do this 100% correctly each and every time in order to prevent that SIF from happening. If we don't have the event review doing that analysis, we're never going to be able to realize, wow, we're setting people up, or we have a brittle system and we're going to fail. When we fail, we have no resilience. We have no capacity to fail safely. So now we can start looking at, okay, the event review, I'm taking the onus, or I'm taking the spotlight off the employee. I'm starting to dig into the system, and I'm starting to build into what are we doing to make the employee safe in the end. So let's dig into each one of these separately, right? And I'm going to do it through the lens of the form that we started to create so that we start to get these consistent results. So again, if you see on the left the green, the first report was somebody reported something happened. That was typically the employee in the field, right? Whether through an app or they, filled out a form or went to their supervisor and said, this is what happened. Then the supervisor fills out some greater details, right? Maybe get some witness statements. But then as we start to get into the form, right, we're going to get into this energy wheel. What is this going to help us to do? Well, first, I want to know, was high energy present, right? This came from EEI, or actually it came from Chevron. We had worked with them on the SIF roundtable for many years. And now I know EEI has adopted it, as well as some other groups. But it basically says, hey, first we need high energy, right? If we don't have this high energy present, then we can rule it out, right? If we answer no, it's not a PSIF, it's not a SIF. Okay, pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Okay, so the next is, okay, we do have high energy present, but now I either need somebody to be impacted directly, right? That's the contact with an employee or a human. Or I need proximity, meaning it was very near that person, right? I need both of those because if neither, right? If a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around, it's not going to hurt anybody. So now I have high energy present, but nobody was near it. It's neither a SIF or a PSIF. So now we're getting somewhere. Very easy, very quickly, I've narrowed it down. So now I need to know, was it a SIF or a PSIF? Because traditionally, we are only measuring actual outcomes. If a person was standing on the top of a 12-foot ladder and fell, is that going to be fatal every time? No. Is it going to be an outcome of a SIF every time? No. I've seen people get up and brush themselves off and walk away and never report it. Okay? So we want to know now, even if the outcome was minor or major, I want to know, or if it was minor, I want to know, could it have been worse? So that's why we kind of do this PSIF, right? So again, we have to have high energy present. It's got to be near somebody, contact proximity, right? And, right, if nobody got hurt or it was minor, right, then I'm going to say this is a PSIF, right? And you see to the right is the EEI definition of what a SIF is, right? The serious injury fatality definition. This is what one gas uses. Do you use that? Maybe. If not, you can insert your own definition here, right? Or ask a series of questions that say, hey, did this happen? Did this happen? However you train your people, however you do it, you can set your form up to do very similarly. But now that I know, hey, yes, high energy was present. Yes, somebody was near it or it contacted them. No, it was not. It's a PSIF. And we can train on this. We can train on the definition, but it should take some of the argument or subjectivity out of it. You can also, because each of these operates independently, is assign them to different people. The first one's the employee. The second one is the supervisor. But the investigation form could be done by EHS or by an HP professional or somebody who is trained in this. I have all the information. If I need more, I can go back to those people and clarify. But now I'm setting it up to where we can do some classification and some SIF review independently. Now, if somebody had the serious injury, right, we can do the SIF PSIF. But now I have every event review is given to me SIF, PSIF, or neither. So I can easily run a report. How many events did I have? How many were SIF? How many were PSIF? How many were neither? And easily break that down for management leadership. And now, as I start to look into my reduced capacity, only because I have only so many hours in the day, so many people on my staff, if we want to drive improvement, I'm going to focus on the areas that matter most, right? So now, the next thing is we started to do, right? We did the classification. That's important. Increase capacity, reduce subjectivity. Now I want to start to drive, hey, we knew human error was present, right? But did human error contribute to the incident? If yes, then we can start to look into these error traps. What was the context that drove the employee to make these decisions? Why did they say that was a good idea? And you can go and you can, for example, under yes, right? We can look at the organizational error traps. And again, this is configurable. If you have specific things that you want in here, right, we can put those in there. These are just a few of the things that we say, hey, was this, for organizational, right? Was there a time pressure, right? Did we want to get this up and running quickly? I don't care how you do it, Todd, just go get it done, okay? Was that something that was impacting the decision-making? So you can do that for organizational. You can do that for the work environment, right? Was there an operational upset, or was there something different that was introduced, right, that changed the dynamics of what happened that day, right? We can get into the tasks or demands and things that impacted that from an error trap standpoint. And then obviously the individual, right? Fatigue, different things like that. And you can check all that apply. So now I have this rich context coupled with, yes, I know a human was involved, but now I want to know why was the decision made? And I can start to look at this from a system-wide impact as opposed to just the individual. Because if we compartmentalize the individual and only say, was there human error present? Then our corrective actions are almost automatically going to focus on the individual and not the system. So this gives us the information. Now, if you're like, oh, Carrie, there's only 6 there and there could be 100 different ways, right? So introduce a text box, right? That adds some burden on you as the individual who has to look at this and make sense of it at the end. But of course, if you wanted a text box and put in some additional insights, right, to say, hey, maybe based on this and we see it enough, we'll add another checkbox. Right? So the last thing that we have, right? So now we said, hey, we classified it. We added the context because context drives behavior. We start to look at the last thing, right? Which is the controls that are in place, right? This is similar to what Todd was talking about. We lock everybody in a room and said these controls have to be in place. But as we do an event review and we say, for example, motion, right? Kinetic energy, right? Somebody dropped a tool, or, right, we had a crane that was swinging and dropped a load, whatever, right? And we say, I want to know, did we have absolute controls or direct controls, right? Or just mitigating controls, or a combination thereof. Now, absolute or direct controls, the way we look at them is human error is not going to influence unduly the outcome of that event. If you had these things in place, right? So think of your hierarchy of controls. This is the engineering, this is the elimination, this is that kind of thing. But if you only have mitigating controls, your PP administrative controls, then you only check those. And now we can start to look at, hey, for all the SIF, we only had mitigating controls. That's something that we can really leverage and really start to look at. Because if we put, again, I have to be 100% safe each and every time, and there's a potential SIF outcome, that's a control that I want to go get addressed as quickly as possible. So why is this important, right? Todd talked about this. When we saw the slide earlier, our injury rates are going down very well over the last 20 plus years. Fatalities have plateaued and they're starting to increase, and it's the first time that the fatality rate has increased above the injury rates overall, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. Why is that important? Because we looked at Heinrich, and Heinrich said, hey, if we focus on the bottom of the pyramid, we'll fix the stuff at the top of the pyramid. What we're finding out is what hurts people isn't necessarily what kills people. And if we focus on all the minor injuries, we're going to address those from a prevention standpoint. We're good at addressing those and getting our injury rates down. But our prevention efforts are going towards minor things as opposed to SIF prevention, which means you're taking capacity away from a prevention standpoint to address SIF-related issues, because our process says, go reduce my injury rates. As a safety professional, go reduce your injury rates. And I do a good job at it, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, somebody gets really hurt, or we have a fatality. And then you're there going, I was doing everything I thought right. Why did this happen? And we see it as a fluke or a one-off, but it's not, right? Low frequency, typically high severity, we tend not to look at as much, but it could bite us in the butt. So we want to know, is it going to? So let's take a look at these, right? Do we have controls in place? And again, you're going to do this if you have multiple exposures to high energy in this event review. You're going to answer one for, say, motion, right? One for, electrical, one for temperature, what have you. And you're going to want to know which controls or what level of controls I had in place for each of those, right? Regardless of the outcome. So that we can understand if it's SIF or PSIF potential, do I have the right controls in place? So now we can start to document it. And if we can add none, we'll add none, right? So now I can start to run reports, as we talked about earlier. If I have SIFs or PSIFs, how many only have mitigating controls in place? Would that be important for you or your organization to know? And can I drill down into it? And if I have it here in this event review, how prevalent is that exposure to the rest of my organization? Sure, we captured it in your facility for this event, but we have 20 facilities, all doing similar things. So now I can start to piece together, are we only using mitigating controls at all of our facilities? Is there a better way to do it? Now you can start incorporating your learning teams. Now you can start incorporating your continuous improvement kind of hat to start to drive, how do we make it so that we fail safely, right? How do we build better controls to protect the worker? Now, the next thing too is, did we have a control present for each high energy source? We kind of classified them before, but I want to know, did we even have a control present? And if the answer is no, is it because, was it missing due to some kind of hazard or risk recognition? Did we just fail to see that this was a hazard at all? Did we fail to see this risk at all? Right? And if the answer is yes, right, then we can look at, right, or no, right? We can start to look at, for that energy source, did we have no control, or what was the level of control? Was it inadequate? Meaning, yeah, we had a control, we think it would work, or we thought it would work, but in retrospect, as we start to drill into it, it's very brittle, right? Probably won't work, but it makes us feel good because we think we have a control. Moderate means it's going to work most of the time, but there's some potential flaws we might not want to work out. And then adequate, obviously, means, no, we nailed it. Okay, it worked when we needed it to work, and we think it'll work each and every time. Now, you could also look at it from, was there a control present? Yes. But was it properly applied, right? Or used to mitigate? And we use this logic-based responses. If you choose this response, you'll get these kind of prompts. Okay? But was the control properly applied and used, right? And based on that, then we can say, no, it wasn't present, or hey, what was the level of control? How good was it? Now we can start to look at, hey, let's address the SIFs with no controls or poor controls first, right? Because if I have a SIF, right, even if the outcome is a SIF, right, and I determined, but hey, based on this, it was adequate, then I've got a good assurance that, hey, wait, maybe we need to address other things first, not necessarily this, and put a lot of energy or effort into it. So I'm going to kind of wrap up a little bit that basically say, hey, before the accidents, we do this proactive learning to review the good, to identify the hidden risks that result in the bad. So we want to, as Todd said, we can use a lot of our activities, like our observations and inspections, to do that verification and validation of controls. What controls do we have? Are they working, or I'm sorry, are they present when I observe the work being performed? Right? And are they working the way we expect them to work? is I observe that kind of blue line snapshot. Because I don't have to wait for an event review to start to look at my controls in place. I don't have to wait for an event review to know I have exposure that could kill people and I need to make sure our controls are good. But you can use a lot of the activities you're doing today to start to drive and operationalize this hop in there, okay? After the accidents, where we want to create capacity to understand whether we were lucky or we were good. And the things that we incorporated, right? The classification, the context, and the controls are going to help us determine in this event review, were we lucky? Meaning we got away with, having poor or inadequate controls, but the outcome wasn't as bad as it could have been? Or were we good? We reviewed the high energy. We felt like we had the majority good or adequate controls. So now, Mr. Manager, we have a good program in place, right? And we have assurance that it's going to work going forward. But we know we have other areas that we can improve and focus on. And I know in this event review, right, we may not like the outcome, but from a capacity or from a operational standpoint, right, we can get better return on investment if we focus in these other areas where we are poor and we know we're poor, right? As opposed to letting the emotions rule the day, right? Knowing that we stopped at human error and we blame the employee because we didn't go into the context, or we didn't even address what controls we had in place to set them up to fail safely. So.
Any questions?
Sure. What does that look like? Pre-job, whoop, thank you. Wow, surprised me. So I'll repeat that. The learning before an accident, what exactly does that look like? Are you referring to attending pre-job briefs or having intentional meetings with craft or leadership, taking a job that happened and just asking what went well?
It's a combination of all, right? So I will preface this by saying I am a safety professional. I've been doing this over 30 years. I put very little value in the pre-job brief itself, the documentation of that. And there's one standard in OSHA, 1926.269, something, that required you to document that, and nowhere else is required that. So I'm more interested in the conversation. Are our crews thinking about risk? Because let's think about it. Getting out of bed this morning is risky, right? Risk is always present in what to do. How are they thinking about risk? And this could happen pre, during, and post. It's really about driving that conversation and reinforcing that every time. And then did they have the controls they needed to keep themselves safe? Now, if I know that there's something that's going to kill you, that falls into that essential bucket, and that would be observable and verified. That's how we let it solve everything. Can I answer your question?
Can I interject too?
I can rephrase it. Like, go ahead.
Well, there's two components that I think add tremendous value. And that is the leadership walk in the field. And we posted the 4 questions that I love to see leadership ask. What's gonna get you really hurt? What controls do you have in place? Is that enough? And basically, what can we do to make it better? Or do you know what you need to do to start work when it's safe, or stop and call a stop work? So that leadership is the enforcement, that cultural component of they're going and having a conversation and ask an employee, do you feel safe doing what you're doing? That's one component of it. And then that's the leadership side. So managers, directors, high up. From the field supervisor down is the actual observations. It's the verification and validation of controls in place, period. What controls do we have in place? And are we doing them consistently? and you're verifying that in the field. And if we have essential controls, I want somebody observing that that SIF-based work and seeing, did you start work when you did not have your essential controls in place? And you'd be surprised at how many do, because they think, well, I thought I needed to get the job done, or I didn't think you were serious about that, or I didn't have the right tool and I get in bigger trouble for not getting the work done than I do for getting caught not doing it safely. So those to me are two, how do I observe what does good look like in the field, that observe blue line work, and the communication of that blue line activity up to management. Have you seen the slide that says, yeah, 100% of workers know how bad it is? When it gets up to the high level, it's like 4% understand blue line. So if we're not communicating that up, we're making trade-offs every day, right? Not enough workers, not enough time, broken equipment, whatever. We are making trade-offs, but management just knows this is the number of widgets I need you to produce. We're not getting hurt, so therefore I think black line. So if we're making these trade-offs and we don't have what we need to get the work done, are we communicating that at management and saying, hey, we're taking on additional risk to meet that productivity demand? Are you okay with that? So those are the things, right? Which is identifying what we're doing in real life work before an event happens and making sure we're communicating that through the HOP principles, right? Because if they go, I don't care how you get it done, just go do it, right? Is that really embracing some of the HOP principles? Does that help answer your question, or you want to rephrase it?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Anybody have a question that has a 30-second to 45-second answer? Here we go. Dwayne Coffee, everyone.
How's this tool scalable for utilities that are much smaller, where you have a plant staff of like 5?
It doesn't matter. I mean, it's the same tool, whether 1,000 people use it or 5.
Yeah, but you're talking about the leadership doing the observations, and they don't have any. The leadership's a corporate group. These are just 5 guys working at a plant.
And that's fine. So you build your forms and your stuff around those 5 people, and you build the reports or the data analysis that you can share with the senior leadership. It does not matter if it's 1 employee or 10,000 employees. It does not matter. It scales.
All right, thanks.
Because it's your process. We gave you examples of what one gas uses. If you have a different process and you feel will give you the same results, then use yours.
You just
Right.
customize it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, gentlemen. Give them some applause, please.